Welcome to the last session of the day, Securing OT Data Transfer. The moderator for this session is Patrick Miller. Patrick, welcome to the stage.
Thank you, Lucien. Thank you so much. All right, everybody, welcome and thank you for joining us. Good day, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be in the world. If you're not already familiar with the platform, please feel free to open up the chat. Let us know where you're tuning in from, get the conversation started. If you have questions and answers, put the questions in the Q&A portion of the interface at the upper right side. Where you put the questions in there, that will help us keep track of the questions versus the chat. We'll try to get to those. Typically, if they go with the flow of the conversation, we can weave them in. Otherwise, we'll put them at the end, and we'll get our presenters to answer as many of those as we can at the end of the session. The session is going to be about 59 minutes, so we'll do our best to keep you on schedule. And this session is made possible by our sponsor, OPSWAT. All right. So with the initial stuff out of the way, let's dive into today's session. The session is titled Securing OT Data Transfers, Proven Strategies for Efficiency and Protection. And we're joined by a panel that brings deep expertise across operations, technology, and transformation in industrial sectors. We have Jeremy Fong, the VP of Products, Salma Orlando, the Senior Director of Products, and Matt Wiseman, the Senior Product Manager from OPSWAT. And let's start with you, Matt. Can you tell us a little bit about OPSWAT, and then tell us a little about yourself, and then we'll go to Sal and Jeremy with some quick bios for everyone.
Perfect. Sounds good. Thank you very much. So thrilled to be here with everybody this afternoon. So as mentioned earlier, my name is Matt Wiseman, Senior Product Manager. I've been with OPSWAT now about 4 years. I've worked within the vendor side for a little while, but also on large manufacturers in the past, DCS vendors, a bunch of experience across the board here for about 10 years when it comes to critical infrastructure cybersecurity. So the team here from OPSWAT, our focus really is on securing critical infrastructure. That could be large manufacturers. We commonly work with major pharmaceutical vendors, pulp and paper, automotive, you name it in manufacturing. We've probably had some conversations in all the different possible industries within this larger group. As a company, OPSWAT's been around doing OT cybersecurity for over 20 years. We have over 500 engineers around the world, over 20 patents, and countless different technologies that help to plug into a manufacturing environment to ensure the maximum operational uptime and operational efficiency. We know often cybersecurity solutions can sometimes impede productivity. Our goal is to help to really enable those teams focus on business efficiency and allow your teams a more seamless workflow while maintaining their cybersecurity posture.
So,
all right. Well, thanks, Patrick. Thanks, Matt. I'm Salma Orlando, Senior Director of Products at OPSWAT. Like Matt, I've been here for slightly over 4 years. My primary focus is in our OT product line, specifically our data diode and security gateway product lines, along with our industrial firewall and our remote access solution for OT. We've evolved the product line recently to include an array of capabilities such as historian replication, real-time OT tag replication, and so prior to that, I was with Owl Cyber Defense for 8 years in a number of product-focused positions, and most recently at Owl as Chief Operating Officer. Again, the focus there was to really develop and deploy secure one-way transfer devices, data diodes, into critical infrastructure.
Jeremy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jeremy Fong. I'm Vice President of Product at OPSWAT. I lead the Secure Managed File Transfer solution. Prior to OPSWAT, I've held a couple of different product leadership positions, one at Netflix in the early 2000s, where I helped them move large files between the network, the studios, production facilities, and post houses. And then I spent about a decade at a company called Kiteworks, focusing on secure managed file transfer, and email security. Very passionate about helping organizations. I joined OPSWAT about a year ago. Protecting critical infrastructure is definitely a focus of mine and of the core team. And I'm excited to be here and look forward to discussion. Thank you.
Fantastic. Great panel of experts. All right, I'm looking forward to the discussion. But before we get started, let's kick off the session with a poll. Paul, can you bring up the first poll for us for the participants? All right, while everybody is getting a chance to answer that poll, while we're waiting for the poll to come through, we want to comment. You guys have much better backgrounds than I do. I have like the Marriott. You guys have these awesome industrial backgrounds. I have background envy at the moment.
We'll get you one of our backgrounds.
Right, I'll take it.
We'll get you one.
All right, and do we have the results of the poll? Okay, it looks like maintaining compliance without disrupting operations comes in at the top. Interesting. All right, let's keep that in mind as we're going through our answers here. Second one is ensuring secure data movement from IT to OT. All right, and then lack of internal expertise or resources, protecting endpoints from removable media, and then enforcing one-way data flow. Okay, good insight. Thank you for participating. Cool. I'm going to jump into the questions. All right, I'm going to start with you, Matt, and let's talk about, can you discuss how digital transformation in manufacturing is driving the need for greater cybersecurity?
For sure. I think that's a great question, Patrick. So with the customers that I've been meeting with, this is an ongoing challenge, right? You have this push for Industry 4.0 that we've heard for a number of years now, and everything else that comes with it, right? You want more data, more insights, provide more information from your production floor to your business analysts. You want to maximize productivity. That's great, right? Everybody wants data. They want to be able to do all of these things. But how you pull that data out and how you're adding all of this modern technology to an existing production line should be at the front of your conversation, right? If you're pulling all of this production data out, but that's leading to a shutdown in your production because of a cyber incident, because of some type of overload on your production systems, that's a disaster. So it really, there's a pretty stark balance between the two, right? You want to make sure that you're pulling out that data in a secure way, but also not impacting productivity, because at the end of the day, that is what matters most.
Yeah. Sal or Jeremy, anything to add? Digital transformation, driving cybersecurity.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Patrick. So as you transfer data from OT to IT, you're looking at transferring, real-time and historical data. You're looking at transferring system logs, event information, really to help to coordinate with your stakeholders, right? So there's going to be a view on business process. How do I use that data? Optimize business process. You're going to be working with your vendors, sharing that data with your vendors for predictive maintenance, controls, SLAs that you're enforcing with your vendors. And that's all part of what Matt mentioned as Industry 4.0 and the migration and using that data to drive efficiencies in your operation. Unfortunately, sharing that data without the proper network infrastructure and network controls opens threat vectors, right? So ideally, you do not want OT to touch IT or touch the internet, right? So you want to create a perimeter at level 3.5, right? And then secure that perimeter through the appropriate security devices. A firewall is pretty standard. Better solutions like secure remote access solutions or data diodes is what you should look at deploying. If you absolutely need remote access, there's specific rules you should follow. Role-based access control and limit access based on least privilege, right? So basically, limit who accesses what data and what they can have access to, right? Replicating data with a diode is a better solution, right? So you're essentially, it's a zero trust solution where you're taking all the OT data you need to replicate and replicate that out into DMZ or to the cloud for cloud resources. So that's actually a better solution.
That makes sense. Jeremy, anything to add?
It just makes me think about the poll question a little bit. It's like how do you ensure business efficiency and also security at the same time, right? And that's really what our customers and the manufacturing industry as a whole faces, right? Is this growing use of internet and AI and all these different things, right? And so the easiest answer is just close off from the internet, right? And I actually come from more of the IT space, right? And learning a lot about IT, OT, and segregating networks and all that. And so our motto, in my past life, kind of give customers control of their data, let them do let them own the data, have full control and full access. And what Sal mentioned about role-based access and all of these things, it rings true to me. And now, how do you, very, very simple use case, right? And we had a very well-known global automotive manufacturing company use 3 of our products, the 3 that we're going to talk about here, right? Kiosk, Diode, and Managed File Transfer all together. And so create some, using the 3 different technologies, including, the scanning, the multi-scan, what we offer multi-scan, CDR, sandboxing, and that type of technology as well. And, if you couple that all together, you're able to apply a platform solution to a problem to give full control, full visibility over our customers. And we'll dig deeper into those use cases in a little bit, but that's what it makes me kind of think about.
Awesome. All right. So, Matt, I'm going to go back to you. Can you explain how to transfer data securely into an OT environment? We talked about getting it out, but how can end users transfer files securely from, we'll say, to or from their endpoints?
So that's a great question. It's certainly an area that we have a lot of different conversations. What we're seeing is a traditional method that's being adopted at a pretty quick pace within manufacturing would be to have some type of USB scanning solution to bring those files securely into the production environment, right? Often we have some type of engineering workstation. It's running the robotics line or anything else, right? The data on that machine is absolutely paramount that we can take that out, but also bring in updates to make sure that we run the line as efficiently as possible and to pull logs out. To do that, right, we've seen USBs typically, right? The sneaker net, kind of that old school term of walking the data in and out is pretty common. What I've seen pretty effective from a number of different use cases is to have some type of dedicated offline scanning station where you're able to scan that either that endpoint itself or have a kiosk or a USB sanitization station at the front of the facility where you're scanning all drives on their way in. That's both of those work quite well, and it's definitely a very effective solution. What I would really emphasize here is the fact that it is an OT style solution, right? It's built to work with minimal or never connected to the internet. And it's something that's designed for that environment. I think that's very crucial when you're trying to build out this type of security program.
Okay, and that's one of the most common ways is to use USB because you don't allow data. And to Sal's point, if you've got a data diode, your data is only going out. There's no other way to get it back in. Yeah, cool. Okay, anyone else? Jeremy, Sal, anything to add on that?
Yeah, just in more practical terms, we talked about the physical, so the kiosk, right? You plug a USB in the kiosk on the IT side, right? And then you have an MFT that connects to a diode, right? That orchestrates, that file delivery into the OT environment, right? And then there's scanning that happens before the file even gets sent across, right? And then there's scanning that can happen after, because we know that we have something called outbreak prevention where we can scan files because files don't change, but URLs change, right? And other things change. So it's not just that you scanned it once and you're secure. Like a lot of organizations think, okay, well, I've got an antivirus, got an AV, I'm good, right? It didn't find anything. So we have those layers, right? But more practically, you have physical, plug the USB, move that file in. You have managed file transfer that can have that role-based access that Sal mentioned, right? That says, okay, we can acknowledge that there's a guest user. They can sign in. We know who this person is. Obviously zero trust that can authenticate. So it's that multi-step process that really helps ingest in addition to kind of getting content out.
Yeah. And the only point I'll add to what Jeremy said is that, what OpSWAT has done is applied security through the whole process of moving data from IT to OT in a manner that allows our customers to match their desired workflow, right? So if you, allow privileged users to carry USB keys directly in, we can do that. If you want to only allow specific files for your infrastructure to go in, we can support that and a whole host of workflows in between. So again, it's not forcing you to adopt a different workflow to meet security. It's us adjusting our technology to meet your workflow.
Right, and that's key because you're going to come across every different model out there. Yep.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, Salt, while I have you, let's go to you next. Can you discuss some best practices for sharing operational data? For example, you mentioned the data diode and the unidirectional capabilities. Describe it and describe kind of how it enhances security.
So a data diode is used to segment networks, so isolate a source network from a destination network. So in the case of OT to IT transfer, right, how a diode would work is we would have a set of connectors, as we call it, that would interface to your OT infrastructure, be it the historian you're using, OPC server, down to a lower layer, Modbus, and a whole host of other industrial protocols we support. And then we can replicate that data into the DMZ or into the IT network such that all the business information you need, right, doesn't require remote access into OT. You're querying a replicate instance of that data that exists into the DMZ or IT, or for that matter, we support MQTT broker. We can send information directly up to a cloud historian if you subscribe to a Viva Pi historian, et cetera. So this is a way of implementing, call it a zero trust access to data, right? Your OT environment stays entirely secure. So how a diode works, again, we have proxy software that integrates using standard IP protocols to the infrastructure on the OT side. We have a complete protocol break, which means just the payload transfers across the optical diode. And then on the destination side, we essentially rebuild that payload and that packet and send it to the destination based on separate provisioning. So there's complete isolation between the OT and IT network. So it's air gap level security while we allow data to flow.
Okay, that was well described. I've heard a lot of descriptions of diodes, and that was one of the better ones. Thank you.
And one other description, they really are not too expensive.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, because that's always been the argument. Yeah. While I have you, you mentioned basically it's designed to segment the network. It is segmenting the OT network off, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then can you give me some, since you've done this for a while, in real world deployments, what are some of the biggest surprises when implementing the unidirectional diodes, that basically this kind of diode based data flow?
Well, what's interesting is most data flow, right, from either OT to IT or within the OT environment is one way, right? So it relies on, typically you have a two-way protocol, TCP, for example, that carries data, which can be proxied and replaced with a diode. So we do have our low-cost solutions that, so for example, in the OT environment, you mentioned 62443, we can actually segment the OT network into operating zones, and a lot of those zones can be isolated with the diode, which results in really no additional operational overhead as compared to a firewall. So a lot of sensors, so on, you're monitoring that information that can be isolated and protected with a diode, and then you're just allowing that data to flow to the next operating zone.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've also seen in some cases the diodes don't add to the compliance footprint where there is a compliance footprint as well.
Right.
It just it doesn't fit the model.
Right.
Jeremy, Matt, anything to add on this?
I think Sal covered that one pretty well. So, yeah.
He's a diode man.
Mm-hmm.
All right. We just had a good question from Chris Daly pop in. I think it fits in really good with the stream. Is there any inspection of the payload by the diode technology, or is provenance preserved by the diode?
So the inspection we do on the payload, so what we do is it's a proprietary protocol going across our diode, which is a fixed format message that we pass the payload across. What we do is we do a CRC check on each of the payload, right? So we're doing an integrity check across the diode, but the nature of a diode, it's physically enforced one way at the physical layer. So the destination side of the diode will be able to report if there's an error. And by the way, this is a very well engineered interface. We've never seen a bit level error across the optics, but At that level, we can report it, and then you would have to initiate retransmitting the data.
Okay. And with the question of provenance, is provenance preserved by the diode?
What does that mean? What exactly?
Think of it more along the lines of integrity, I think, if I'm getting your question right, Chris. I mean, it sounds like through the CRC it is, but that almost answers the question with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right, Chris, if you've got further questions on this, just let us know. And thanks, that was a good question. Okay, let's go to Matt. What the source of the data is. So in terms of provenance, he's asking about the source of the data from source to destination, I'm assuming. Yeah.
So there isn't again, the nature of an optical diode, there will not be an acknowledgement back from destination back to source, right? So we're doing integrity checking through the process of transmitting, but there isn't an acknowledgement back. Now we do have another product that's called a security gateway, right? That's actually architected to have assured data delivery, which does have, it allows a secure acknowledgement to come back, but that's not a diode.
Right. Okay. All right. I'm going to move on to Matt again. Now, why are file transfers still one of the most overlooked ICS or OT attack vectors, despite being responsible for significant breaches? We've seen this on a regular basis. It's in the news regularly. And as threat actors increasingly exploit these file-based vectors like USBs, laptops, and remote access file drops, how are industrial organizations rethinking this kind of file movement?
Yeah, I think it's an incredibly interesting area and probably one of the, I'd say most rapidly changing areas of conversation I have with customers, right? The idea of you have some old laptop sitting in the corner with an old AV that's been offline for years, and everybody brings their USB and scans it. That is, really moved on, right? No one's doing that anymore. Most organizations do have some type of formal USB scanning solution to help with their file transfer, but we've actually seen growth beyond that, right? A formal USB scanning solution, great. You've got one step in the right direction. If you can integrate that USB scanning solution for any of your contractors or visitors or employees who are arriving, and actually integrate that with, a diode and an MFT, you're able to then align, the simple scanning, make everything easy, but actually drop off all those different files you need at their destination. You're not scanning terabytes of data and waiting forever. You're scanning what's needed, transferring it through the asset where it's needed, and then picking it up on the inside. The other area we've seen a lot of intrigue here is how much more efficient teams can be with this formal, more implemented solution versus an ad hoc, oh boy, somebody showed up with a USB. What do we do now? Right? Everybody starts sweating. How do you figure this out? It's critical. We must bring it in. So having this more formal solution is not only more secure, but more efficient. I know Jeremy's had a lot of great conversations in this area here. I'm sure you'd like to chime in.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I can jump in. I mean, really, when it comes down to it, we'll use this opportunity to talk a little bit more about managed file transfer and secure managed file transfer, right? Managed file transfer has been around for quite a long time, almost 3 decades, right? And initially the focus, it goes back to that poll question again, the focus was fairly transactional, about business efficiency, right? Getting the job done, getting things done, right? And we now know, right, in the past, maybe in the past 10 years, things have escalated quite a lot, right? And business efficiency becomes that thing that gets stopped because of cybersecurity threats. And so that's constantly on my mind. And I mentioned before, my background isn't cyber, but I've been in cybersecurity for over a decade now. And you start to think about, who the malicious outsiders are, who the malicious insiders are. And it just becomes something that the world wasn't what it was even 10 years ago, right? And so with something like managed file transfer, you can create policies inside of it, right? And you can create role-based access, policies on files. Talked a little bit about integrity, monitoring, all these different things. So you can kind of, determine, even specific down to the IP address, right? So going back to the fundamentals, right? Having full control, right? Visibility and control, right? Having the multi-layer security, right? When it comes to files, not just files, but also the transport security layer. And having, at the end of the day, we haven't talked about reporting and compliance, right? So at the end of the day, it's like not only the world is so much bigger now. It's like not only do we need to think about the attackers, the outsiders, the malicious outsiders, but you have to think about how do you prove what happened, right? And so that's one thing that I've been investing the past year on at OPSWAT is, investing in that report, right? What we'll call a compliance report, and even the file analysis report that we can now take to your board meeting, right? A CISO can take to his or her board meeting and say, hey, look, here, this is what OPSWAT did. These are the threats that OPSWAT prevented, right? And so just to add a few things there.
Yeah. Sal, anything else to add?
No, I think Jeremy covered it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Jeremy, I think you raise a really interesting point. It's not just proving it to the board, it's proving it in the event that you actually have an incident and there's a reconstruction of the events and you can show what happened and what didn't based on the record that's created with this. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
That'll handle insurance, boards, investigations, you name it, regulators. Fantastic. I get to speak as a recovering regulator. I've actually done that before. So yeah. Okay, now we've got a perfect break right now before I go into the next set of questions. Paul, can you bring up the next poll? Right, how do you currently move data between your OT and IT environments? We've got 5 options here. Okay. Give everybody a minute to answer. I did see in the chat, we've got folks from Tennessee, California, Slovakia. Awesome, Slovakia for attending. I happen to be in Oklahoma City at another security event this week. We've got someone from Mid-America, which is a pretty big zone. So somewhere in the middle of America. All right. And Paul, if you think we've got enough responses on that poll, you can bring it up. Thank you. All right. Looks like moving data between OT and IT, the highest numbers are coming in at network segmentation or firewalls. Okay. Hey, Houston. Thanks, Joseph. And we got some more numbers coming in. Managed file transfer platforms come in second. Manual transfers. I would have just, my personal assumption, I figured USBs and laptops would have been the highest number on there, but it wasn't. And then there were a bunch that said they don't do it, which is interesting because it's, I mean, there's at some point you're gonna have to move data somehow, some way. So I'm sure that just means we get creative when we need to. All right, that's good data. Thank you folks for participating in the poll. And on to the next set of questions. I'm gonna go to you, Sal. Just this month, CISA released a warning stating that cyber threats targeting OT systems are on the rise. How can manufacturing companies protect themselves better?
Well, I think there's a framework that has been put out by CISO, and a couple things we've talked about. First, the idea of properly segmenting OT from IT, right? To make sure there's a proper security perimeter protecting your plant from outside threats. Second, further segmentation of the OT network. So you want to make sure operating zones are isolated, and make sure that if a threat is introduced, you prevent the propagation of threats across your OT infrastructure. Other areas in terms of making sure systems are properly patched, right? So the whole supply chain security that Matt was talking about before, with securely moving files into your OC, make sure they're properly vetted before you're updating your systems, but you need to keep your systems updated. So there's a host of recommendations like that work towards keeping your infrastructure secure.
Yeah, Jeremy, Matt, anything to add?
I can add just maybe one more point. Something that I talked about at RSA, right? Is there's an illusion of secure enough, right? And so I love the poll questions, by the way. So going to the poll questions and those that one of the things that I think about is, the first question I'll ask a CISO is, do you know where all your data is going? Do you know where your data is? Your sensitive data, what your data is. And so people work with, DLP, and they try to classify data. Everyone's trying to do something, right? It's and the solutions are, there's spectrum of solutions. And the whole illusion of secure enough is really, I mentioned it earlier, is, we scanned the file. It gave me it's told me the file is good. Let's just pass it through. And in the old days, I speak to the old days, is sort of, if you have control, people think, I have control of the information. I have control of, going to the movie industry kind of thing, is sort of, we made that, we put it on a drive, we flew it on an airplane and flew it across the world. And the truth of the matter is that those things can change hands over time. And so it's just, the secure is enough is a thing. And then obviously the balance between security and business efficiency is something that we try to invest a whole lot at OpsWatt, right?
Real quick on that CISA notice that came out, I did see in the list of mitigations they've got, remove OT connections to the public internet, which that kind of seems like a no-brainer, but some organizations still do this, and some of them have good reasons for it even. And some of the other ones are secure remote access to OT networks. And then the one that I think is key for us is the segment the IT and OT networks. So we've got like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 key recommendations, and we're talking about at least 3 of those things here in this discussion. Looks like we lost Sal for a second. Okay, well, hopefully we'll get him back. I've got more questions for him.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. You just lost your video. At least you're still
my video's died.
That's great. We still got you in voice.
Okay.
That's good. We'll roll with it. We're good. All right. I'm going to move back onto the questions. There we go. And this one is from Matt. Matt, I saw that you recently participated in some new research with the SANS Institute. I'm a former SANS instructor myself, and that uncovered new data on how cybersecurity investment trends in industrial environments is tracking. Share with us some of the key findings and how companies can be prepared or unprepared to handle these rising threats to targeting OT systems. I'm sure you've got some good stats.
Yeah, it was something that I've been looking for a while, Patrick, where we were trying to figure out, where is the market actually going? Right? You hear people talking all the time, whether it's, asset visibility or USB scanning or segmentation, and folks are like, oh, this is the priority, but what's actually the priority? So we partnered with SANS to try and figure out, 1, where were attacks coming in? 2, how many attacks were these organizations experiencing? And then 3, what are companies doing to try and prevent future incidents? So to me, there were a few key takeaways. The one thing that I thought was really interesting was we saw that it was about 58% of incidents that happened in the OT environment were caused by an IT-related threat, right? It speaks to the need for a proper managed file transfer or data diodes and, proper segmentation, rules, least privilege, and make sure that, folks only have access to what they need and you've properly segmented your systems. Our earlier conversation on Industry 4.0, we saw that 33% of attacks were caused by some sort of internet accessible device, right? Somebody threw in some new edge device with the hope that they can pull data to the cloud. And, there was a vulnerability, it wasn't patched, and there was an incident caused. And another number that really stood out was we saw that 27% of incidents caused were from some sort of transient device. So call that an SD card, a USB, a laptop that folks were carrying to and from site. So it really does speak to the need of, do you have something that can prevent that vector for all 3 key areas? The next piece of that was, how many people actually had an incident? We saw about 27% of organizations had at least 1 incident in the last 12 months, which is alarming, but you think it might be a bit higher. The piece that really leapt out to me that I found super concerning was more than 10% of organizations had between 26 and 100 security incidents last year. Wow. And this is, a lot of manufacturing clients that were, participating in this survey. So definitely concerning, right? That's loss of production, that's loss of view, loss of control, damaged goods in production as a result of some type of cyber incident. So again, a lot of different data we pulled from the study. The last thing that I want to highlight here was around the budget priorities, right? So with all that given, where were folks looking to invest this year? You hear a lot about asset visibility, but that really was low on the list. It seems like folks were really focused on prevention, A big piece was around, again, scanning those transient assets, right? What are you doing to scan your USBs or laptops? A lot of discussions around secure file transfer solutions, right? To make sure that there was something in place that they could enforce, track, view, and control where files were coming in and out. And right at the top of the list was segmentation, right? Are you building zones and conduits around your most valuable assets? Are you doing this internally? Is it at the perimeter? Are you using diodes, firewalls? So to me, it was a really interesting study. We asked SANS the questions, and then they went, did all the hard work to actually figure out what was going on. But some great insights there partnering with them.
Yeah, fantastic. I know they got a pretty wide reach. Yeah, fantastic. That's good data. And this was presented at RSA, right?
Correct.
Yeah, good,
Yeah.
good. I'm glad it's getting some good reach. And it's good to see RSA adding a lot more manufacturing and critical infrastructure to the content as well.
Definitely.
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, I was just going through my own notes on this. I saw that the number one budget priority was defensible network architecture, and I thought that spoke volumes.
Yeah, it certainly does.
Yeah. Sal, anything, Jeremy, anything to add?
No, nothing there. Thank you.
All right. Okay, now for my next block of questions, before we go there, let's bring up our next poll. Paul, you got our poll for us? There we go. What drives your OT cybersecurity investment the most? And we just asked Matt after he presented this budget report, like we were told. All right, compliance and regulatory pressures, internal risk assessments or audits, recent cyber incidents or near misses, digital transformation initiatives, executive awareness, and strategic alignment. I'm gonna, let's see. There. All right, while we're waiting for the poll to be filled out, we see some more folks from Czechia, awesome. Houston, Austin, good representation from Texas today. All right, and Lisa Marie, thank you for the connection link. And Marius Cefac from Romania, fantastic. All right, hey Paul, how about our results? Are we there yet? Okay, looks like we've almost got a tie. We got a tie between compliance and incidents. Wow. So we're fearing our attackers as much as we do our auditors. That's an interesting balance. All right. And then internal risk assessments and audits, digital transformation came in second. All right. So it looks like incidents and audits are the top two on that. Is that what you would have expected, Matt, given the study that you did?
I mean, it sounds about right? Both those things typically strike fear into an operations team when they hear there's either an incident or an auditor arriving. So that's typically where there's a little bit more money to go around and add some more defensible architecture.
And usually after the incident comes the audit. So you get one, you get two, pretty much. All right. Sal or Jeremy, anything to add on the thoughts about that poll?
That's interesting. It's I think about, everybody thinks about budgeting, and the cost of the incident is astronomical, right? There's something that we can talk for days about, because you don't want to be reactive, you want to be proactive, right? And so that means you want to have something there, right? A comprehensive solution that can help you be proactive and not as much. And so, which is why we're building a lot of different things into our platform, in addition to not just the multi-scan, but the multi-scan is one piece. The sandboxing, the static and dynamic analysis is another piece, which I don't have my colleague here to speak to that as much. But and we're also investing in things like real-time threat intel, right? And so if you think of that in terms of an MFT, right? You have the audit log, and you want to scrape the audit log to ensure that you're expecting the right behavior, right? So what you're seeing there in, say, the audit log, the syslog, is telling you that, oh, these are all trusted interactions and events, right? And so we're investing in that. But that was interesting just to see that. So the incidents, it just makes me shaky, right? To look at those types of things.
Yeah. No one wants the incident.
No.
Saul, did you have something to add?
Well, compliance reporting is, it varies by industry and what's required. From a diode perspective, from a gateway's perspective, that tends to have lower compliance reporting requirements than, say, a firewall does. So firewalls you're maintaining, and you're auditing the rules, and you're documenting those rules, and so on. Diodes, one of the advantages that they have for a lot of industries is that it's set and forget. Once you provision the diode, it's a network security device that doesn't have to be monitored or audited. It just performs its task.
All right. Well, Saul, I have you, and we're talking about data diodes.
Sure.
Can you talk through some common use cases and provide some real-world examples of deployment of data diodes in manufacturing? Like, when should you use a diode versus a firewall?
Yeah, well, let me start with some use cases, and then we can talk about firewall versus diodes. So, we do have a number of use cases within manufacturing and other vertical markets as well. So, one example is we have a food processing plant, right? They wanted to isolate their OT environment, and they're using our diode technology to replicate a SQL database from the OT side out to the IT side. So that database is used to capture, real-time events that are happening in the factory, right? And they replicate that out. We have a automotive manufacturer that through a partnership we have with Emerson is using our diode to isolate the SCADA system and replicate SCADA data out, and that's an automotive company. I mean, obviously, we're in other critical infrastructure markets as well. So, water, wastewater, they're using our diode technology to replicate real-time OPC tags, right, to provide real-time reporting of the plant operation. We're using diodes for secure file transfer, transferring data into the OT environment. So there's quite a few use cases that our customers are using our diode technology for. Also, our MetaDefender Core scanning engine, we actually have that integrated onto our diode platform. So for applications where you want to use a file share and scan a file before it's transferred, we support that application as well.
Okay, and most of the talk we've had so far about diodes is the one-way flow of data out. You touched on getting data in. Talk to me about that.
Sure. If you think of patch updates,
Yeah.
right? Again, it's what we mentioned earlier about really providing the appropriate workflow for each customer.
Okay.
Right. So there are use cases where you want to move software updates or other files into the OT environment without necessarily using a USB or portable media device. Right. There's some organizations that restrict that. Right. We can still use the advantages of our MFT and our kiosk, right, for the user interface and scanning that file, but then the diode can be used to push that across the security perimeter.
Okay. And you mentioned you'd touch on the difference between a diode and a firewall.
Yeah. So, a firewall basically is a software process that runs on a CPU, right, that looks at the inbound TCP or UDP traffic and filters it, right? So you're restricting the flow of data based on the rules that are established in a firewall. Firewalls can be set up to be one way, but it's still using a two-way protocol, and they're vulnerable, right? So there's a lot of instances out there where there's software vulnerabilities within a firewall that compromise the integrity of the firewall, and then it compromises your network segmentation strategy. A diode has its limitations in terms of it's really meant for traffic that can be moved one way, but the advantage is, again, as I stated earlier, it's set and forget, right? Once you provision a diode, it doesn't change. There's no need to change it, right? We have cases where diodes running in nuclear power plants haven't been touched in 10 years, and they're securing the safety systems around nuclear reactors. So it's a trusted technology by the Department of Defense, by highly regulated industries like nuclear power plants. And what we've done as a company is we've actually driven the cost of diodes down, so they're an attractive alternative to firewalls. So in places where you can move traffic one way, we have a solution, which is again, cost competitive.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, if it can protect a CIS in a nuke plant, it's probably something worth considering. All right. I'm going to go to Matt next. Matt, how can a manufacturing plant protect OT environments from removable media threats? 'Cause if you got to use removable media to get something in there, this is one of the things we got to cover. And then can you provide maybe like a good, maybe detailed real world use case illustrating how you've seen organizations basically safeguard or secure their OT environment using this removable media option?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a great question, Patrick. So, but going back to what came up earlier here in our conversation, the idea about finding something that works, for your workflow and for your organization is always what's best. I can't tell you how many times I've seen one person in an organization make a purchase, force a software or hardware solution upon a group of folks in a facility, and have them find every possible means around it to avoid using this.
Yeah.
So I think it really comes down to finding something that works for your org. Speaking specifically about USBs, we have large pharmaceutical manufacturers, large automotive manufacturers using our solutions. Some use a very simple, scan at a kiosk at the entrance when you check in, do your safety training, sign whatever you need to sign as a visitor, and you enter it with your USB. Others scan at a kiosk. They then copy onto a clean, known good, software or hardware encrypted USB. If you see someone on the floor with this drive, it's safe. Bring the physical security into it. That also works well. We have others who go a step further, and they use either our hardware or software solutions to actually enforce the scanning process. So if I were to be, forgetful one day, I bypass the kiosk and I start plugging in USB drives, they'll actually be blocked at the point of contact, and they won't be able to be used in the facility until they're scanned. So again, that next step, and going kind of the furthest end would be to drive almost a full visitor management solution where you scan at the kiosk, and email goes out to your site contact. They're aware that you've arrived. Those files are copied from the USB through to a managed file transfer through a diode into the asset you're planning to work on, which is really a full scale, very highly efficient solution. So you need to find what works best for you. But the key is to, look at your organization, look at your workflow, speak to folks who are in operations on the plant floor, speak to folks who are in IT, what data do they need, when they're looking for threats, how do they like to consume that data? And then speak to the plant manager, right? Get all sides of the story and then choose something that will work for your org, right? Making a single top-down decision and forcing it on people is just going to cause backlash. Yeah. Especially for something that people try to circumvent with USBs, right? It's the only cyber threat you can pick up and put in your pocket. So having that open communication and bringing in the different stakeholders can really help you be a lot more efficient, and that's what we've seen across different manufacturing sectors.
Yeah, the USB in the parking lot issue has been a long-standing problem. Not to mention it's been ostensibly done by nation states, just
correct
in a very real way. Yeah. So a very, very good. I like the range of options because I have seen every possible process under the sun, and that really does allow for a lot more flexibility. That's good. Good to hear. All right, I'm going to go to Jeremy. Jeremy, we've talked about the diodes. We talked about some removable media. Let's talk about securing file transfer solutions, really to help balance the operational efficiency with this security and compliance. We kind of touched on a little bit. Let's flesh that out a little bit. And if you've got maybe like a real world example or a deployment, you can give us a story from.
Sure. Let's jump back to automotive. And I mentioned it earlier, right? One of the largest global automotive companies. And it's very, very simple need, actually. Simple. I say simple because we've been talking about this for the past hour, right? And kind of segregating between IT and OT, right? But in the beginning, they were letting USB drives in, and so we've been working with them, right, to come up with that 3-part solution, right? And so we kind of said it all before, right? Is kind of bringing USB drives in, but they have they have vendors, right? Outside vendors, as many on this call already know, you have this need to bring outside vendors in. That's the main problem, and you need to update the controllers, right, in the OT environment. And sometimes you need to let them physically, come into the facility and sign in. And so that's where it starts. That's where it starts with the kiosk, right? And so the kiosk, kind of takes them in, and you can even plug a USB drive in, and you do the multi levels of scanning in there. And then from there, our solution, what it does is the kiosk connects to our MFT and then brings the MFT in. And from MFT facilitates a transfer using diode transfer unidirectionally from the IT environment to the OT environment. And then obviously from the other end, you have a trusted person that can log in, make the download if the file is deemed secure, and proceed with business as usual. And so it's describing that, it's a very seamless process. And one of the things that we hadn't mentioned is ease of use, right? And so security and ease of use, they don't always go hand in hand, but our products and what we've been doing even over the past year is making the platform work more seamlessly together. And so having a user count, how do you make a user count from one end on one system trusted across the network, right? Well, you have to create at least one line connection, and then have that same user authenticate, right? Prove that person is who they say they are, and go in and grab the file and then do what they need to do. And so that's a use case that we've seen over and over and over. Similarly, Patrick, you mentioned about getting data out, right? Getting data out of the OT environment, and so getting data out of the OT environment is a very similar process, right? It's like you can go back in to, in many cases, a real world example would be kind of taking log files, right? That happens all the time, right? And log files are not usually small; they're large files, and sometimes many big gigabytes, right? And so using an automated process helps with business efficiency, right? So you drop the file into a folder, and then that file gets taken. A notification gets triggered, and they're off to the races. Whoever needs to access it gets notified and goes into download. And so I'm describing that very simply, but all the technology that I mentioned work together to make that happen, and made that happen for our customer.
Okay, great example. And I would argue that simplicity and security go hand in hand, because the harder you make it on, especially engineers who are really brilliant people, they'll just find a way around it. So it's got to be easy enough to use, or it won't get used. Just what I've seen.
Definitely.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, we've got a little bit more time left. I want to squeeze in one more poll if we can. Paul, can you get our last poll up there for us? All right. What would be the most helpful next step for you after today's session? Detailed case study, seeing a live product, attend more webinars, speak to a security expert, or nothing at this time. Okay. I put my answer in. Okay. We've got a little more in the chat. UNS, we'll get to the questions here in just a second. Our Q&A. We had a couple of questions in Q&A. I don't see them there anymore. All right. How about that poll, Paul? Where are we? Okay, more webinars and educational sessions. That doesn't surprise me. Everybody's here to learn. Fantastic. We'll keep it up. By all means, do more. And then there was
Patrick, there'll be questions in the published Q&A.
Perfect. Okay, because there were a couple more there I wanted to make sure we could get to, but all right. I've got about 4 minutes left, and I'm going to ask everybody, if you've got questions of this brilliant panel on this subject, let's get them in the Q&A box now so we can get them answered. And if not, I've got my own questions for them. My question that I prepared for you is, what is a misconception you often encounter about OT data transfer security, and how do you correct this misconception? Jeremy, you were last. I'm going to start with you first. Got any ideas?
Some ideas. Actually, a shocker, when I first joined OPSWAT, kind of learning how much, air gap, needs to happen. I think that's the biggest one for me, is that, there's this concept of air gap, right? And, a true air gap, what is a true air gap? And it's really complete isolation, right?
Yeah.
And in some cases, that's needed, especially with the energy companies we work with nuclear, right? That's absolutely needed. And but there is a I don't want to say compromise. I want to say there's a balance, right? And you've heard it from everyone on the panel here, right? There's a balance of, which is why, people, our prospects, customers can go to OPSWAT, right? Is we have that balance, we provide that, and the whole ergot thing is a shocker to me, but also something that I widely accept it as well.
Okay, and we did get a question in real quick from looks like Harsha. Do you use UNS for IT or OT data transfers? Is this an acronym you're familiar with?
I am not.
No, me neither.
UNS.
Okay, yeah. And one more from Chris Daly. Does your scanning tool check for steganography?
I'm happy to take that one. So when it comes to steganography, right, it's often pretty deceptive for traditional AV. So I know Jeremy spoke earlier about all the different layers of technology. So we use 8 different detection and prevention technologies, whether it's in a kiosk, an MFT, or whatever solution you have from OPSWAT. But what we would really use here is our deep CDR technology. Essentially, we take a file, rip it apart, and look for anything abnormal. So think about JavaScript in a PDF, macros in an Excel file, or something embedded deep within a video or a photo. From there, we take the file and actually regenerate a clean, free-to-use file without any of those abnormalities. So it's a great tool for detecting zero-day as part of a zero trust framework, but any type of embedded threat in a photo or a video would be stripped out.
Awesome. Good answer. And last one is, are any of your tools certified or evaluated against the NIST Computer Forensics Tool Testing, or CFTT program? You may or may not know, just curious. Not sure.
Did it say NIST?
NIST, N-I-S-T?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that specific, but NIST definitely, NIST framework is something very common to me.
Okay.
NIST policy and framework is something that we want to align our products towards.
What we're doing with our diode product line is we have common criteria, EAL 4+ certification on the diode, as well as our unidirectional security gateway, and we're completing IEC 62443 4-1, 4-2 certification on our bilateral security gateway. That includes vulnerability assessment, the assessment of your design processes, pen testing, etc. So
Okay.
we're going through.
And that's pretty close. It would map over to the CFTT from what I remember.
Yeah.
All right, well, we're about to wrap up. I'm going to ask you all, I'm going to start with Saul, then Jeremy, and I'm going to finish with Matt. I'm going to ask, give me one sentence you want these folks to take away and learn about these technologies to secure OT and manufacturing. So again, Saul, Jeremy, then Matt, one sentence to finish them out.
Yeah, I think from a technology point of view, as far as cybersecurity, there's no silver bullet, right? So you have to look at your processes, you have to look at your specific use cases, what makes sense for your operation, right? And then look at the technologies that are going to address the broadest range of potential cyber threats that your organization is going to face. So it may not be a diode, right? But certainly, USB security that we provide with kiosk, file transfer security with MFT. These are all components that build an overall platform that can secure your environment.
Yeah, I'll go next. First of all, thank you, Patrick, for your time. And I think it was very intriguing, conversation altogether. I would say that something that I think about and my takeaway from this is more like look for whatever solution you choose, right? Is look for something that's comprehensive, right? If you're finding a solution to match a use case, you're just looking at that use case. Right? You really want something that has an umbrella effect of securing your organization, not just from IT to OT. That's obviously very important, but also what's happening other parts of your organization as well.
Fantastic. And Matt?
Sure. I think the one thing I'd want the group here to take away would be to look at some type of technology or workflow that's fully enforceable, right? Something that's easy to replicate across sites, but also, it's not just a policy, right? The honor system isn't really a great security policy when it comes to scanning files or transferring data. Like a diode is one-way enforceable transfer. MFT, there's different role-based privileges. In your kiosk solutions, there's often an enforcement policy that you can put in place. So any of those endpoints are protected that are sitting beyond the protected zone. So I think the enforceable workflow that you can replicate across sites really goes a long way to giving you peace of mind, especially if you work in a security role, to make sure that everyone is following that, and you don't have to be constantly looking over everyone's shoulder to make sure they're scanning on their way in.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks everybody for your time. Panelists, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Lucian to close out the sessions for the day.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Matt, Jeremy, Sal, for the insights, and the 36 other speakers throughout the day. And stay tuned if you're in the audience. You will get the link to the recordings, as well as a certificate for attending. So appreciate the attendance. And September 10th is the AI Frontiers, part of the IoT World's Manufacturing Day, as well as then we have in October the ICS Cybersecurity Day, and in December the IoT World's Manufacturing and Supply Chain. With that, this concludes the program for today. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Thank you.